Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal podcast. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you to all of you who continue to send lots of love and support to the shows and letting other people know about the Paranormal Portal. We got a fantastic show for you guys today. I am joined by Jim Sullivan of New York, who is a retired engineer, and he has had an incredible amount of pretty fascinating, amazing experiences, and he's here to share those with us today. So I guess we'll get right at it. Hey, Jim, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on, Brent.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Again, you had listened to my Coast to Coast interview, which is really awesome, and it was really cool that you reached out following that and wanted to come on the show. I guess, as always, I'm going to start with my canned initial question, and that is, where did this start for you?
Well, this started when I was 30 years old.
Okay.
But at that time, I had been raised more or less as a Joe Science guy. I was into astronomy very early in my life, and I worked at the local planetarium. I built my own telescopes. I was into photography, especially taking photographs of the night sky. When I graduated from high school, I got an Air Force scholarship and went to college on that because it was just after the Apollo moon landings. Oh. And I thought maybe I'd like to be an astronaut. So I got the scholarship and went to college. Unfortunately, or probably fortunately for me, the war ended before I graduated from college. And there were so many pilots coming back from Vietnam. I was released from the program at my request. Mm-hmm. And so then I came back home, and I didn't really know what to do with myself, but I had a degree in geology. I had 6 years in college, 4 years at the University of Arizona, actually 5, and 1 year in the middle at Syracuse University. I was one of these guys that didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I knew it. So I kept changing programs, and that kind of dragged out the amount of time it took me to graduate. I finally came back home, and just to make some money, I took a job with General Motors. And after about a year and a half on the assembly line, my brother-in-law, who was a supervisor there, said, "Why don't you try out for an apprenticeship?" And I was like George Bailey. I go, "I'm not working here in this factory, I'm going to go out and do important things with my college degree and everything." And well, I got into the apprenticeship program, and I loved it right from day one. It was just so unique. Every day was different. You never knew what you were going to be working on. You were working with guys mostly your own age, but they were training you every day, and it was a union job, so the money was good, the benefits were good. I was able to get myself a nice apartment and everything, and eventually I bought an old farmhouse. I was a big fan then of This Old House. It was kind of a new program then.
Oh, sure.
In the early 1980s.
Yeah.
So I bought this old Green Acres type farmhouse. It was built in 1830, and the gutters were hanging off of it, and it was abused, and it needed help. And so I spent the next 7 years by myself gutting that whole house out and completely remodeling it inside and out. It came with 2 acres. It was on the top of a hill. And what really got me started in all this, back then it was called New Age studies or experiences, was I was replacing the electric service. I was an electrician by then. I was a journeyman electrician. And I decided I wanted to put a new circuit breaker panel in. And so I installed the hardware. And on this one day, I was making the final connections. I mounted a new meter box on the side of the house, and I was connecting the wires. And Murphy's Law, as I was making the final connection, the big electrical connector, we call them bugs, but they're basically a big screw connector. You put both ends of the wire in and tighten it down, and it pinches the wire into the enclosure. So when you put your meter in, there's a good electrical connection to your house. This big metal thing dropped out of the box, and it landed right at my feet. Now, it just so happened that the position where I was putting this enclosure was directly above an outdoor cellar doorway, and they were made out of steel. So I was standing on these metal doors, and this metal bug, we call it, fell. I felt it and heard it hit right at my feet, and it bounced. And I was still hanging onto the wires, and I looked down and I couldn't see it. I finally had to let go of the wires, and I looked around and I could not find that thing. And I had to have it. I needed that to make the connection to get the power back on in the house so stuff wasn't melting in the refrigerator. And of course, it was a 90-degree July day, you know. So I went crazy, tearing out little shrubs and combing my fingers through the grass, looking for something that should have been obvious. This thing was bigger than my thumb, bright, shiny metal, and it was a sunny day out. Where did it go?
Yeah.
So it occurred to me to try dowsing. Now, I had never dowsed before, but about a month or two earlier, the local utility had come out to my house as a precursor to this electrical work. I had them replace one of the power poles in my front yard. And the guy that came from the utility wanted to know if I knew where my water line was near that pole. Mm-hmm. Because I had the driveway out near it staked out for some excavating work. So I told him, no, I have no idea where the underground pipe is. So he goes, no problem. So he went out to his truck, and I was just watching him out the window, and he took out a couple brazing rods from his truck and bent them into L-shaped dowsing rods, and he started holding the rods up like this and walking back and forth. Well, I was amazed. Yeah. I didn't know what he was doing, but I knew he was a tradesman, so if he was doing something, it had to work. I was out there in a flash, and he basically told me what dowsing was and gave me like a thumbnail on how it worked, and he even let me try and hold the rods, but I had no skill at it. But it stuck in my mind that since I couldn't find this electrical part, maybe I could dowse. And I had purchased some books on dowsing and read about it, but it was a little too weird for me. I didn't want to really put any time into it. But now I was pressed. I tried every logical way to find this bug. So I went in the house, and I actually made a pendulum out of a half-inch nut and a little piece of string. And I went out there, and I just stood 10 feet from the site where I was working, and I asked the pendulum to show me where is this little metal bug from where I'm standing. And it started oscillating, and it settled down a direction. And I walked along that direction right up to the edge of the cellar door concrete there, and there was nothing in the grass. I mean, I would have been able to see it if it was there, like maybe I did something wrong. So I moved to another position and did the same thing, and it settled on a certain swing. And I walked along there looking and very carefully in the grass, and there was nothing there. And I thought, what is this? So I figured I'll give it one more go. 3's the charmer. So I moved to another location, and I did it again. What direction is it from me to the metal piece I'm looking for? And it swung in another direction, and I I walked along it and there was nothing there in the lawn. I thought, what a waste of time, and I started walking away. But as I was walking away, I thought, like, what am I going to do? It was a Sunday, of course. You always want to do jobs like that on a Sunday. And back then, everything was closed on a Sunday. And even if the hardware stores were open, it wasn't the kind of part you could buy at a hardware store. It came with the meter box. So I thought, what am I going to do? I mean, I'm not going to be able to get a part until I get a hold of the utility and have them drop off another box to me or something. And then I turned around and I looked back at where I had just been and the three directions that I dowsed from. And I saw that they all approached a single point, but the single point was up on top of the concrete. And there was a loose piece of concrete right where these things crossed. And I thought, there's no way it could be under there. There's not enough room under there. I mean, it would have had that little piece of concrete that was on top, had broken free years before, and it was laying in the lawn, and I had just kind of smushed it in there as much as you can smush concrete. And
Sure.
so there's no way. This thing's too big. It couldn't fit under there if it wanted to. So I thought, my logical mind, I'm not looking. I lived out in the middle of nowhere, but I'm not going to go over there and look just because this pendulum indicates that's where it is. So I started going towards the house, and there was like something just like an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. Just look, Jim, just look, then you can forget about it. If you don't look, you'll always wonder, That's all right. So I just walked over there, and I got over and I picked a piece of concrete up, and I was so sure it wasn't under there. I started to turn my head away because I didn't even want to look. It was such a ridiculous thing to do. But as I did, I glanced down and it was there. And when I'm getting goosebumps right now when I saw that, the feeling that went through me was exactly like an electrical shock that I had a couple of as an apprentice. Sure. I mean, but that's when I saw that there, it like went through me and like canceled out a whole bunch of stuff I thought was true.
Wow.
I don't know how that could have been there. I don't know how this nut on the string could know that.
Right.
But anyway, I got the job done. But that right there was the seminal moment, because it really kind of ticked me off, because I thought, I've been lied to my whole life. All this other stuff I've learned, sure, that could be true, but nobody ever told me about this.
Right.
Right. How could this be? And what about the people I trusted, like parents and stuff like that? So I determined that day I will never take someone else's word for anything again. And now I've got to go back and vet everything that I thought was baloney.
Yeah. So
from that day forward, I just set myself out to try anything that occurred to me. I think the first thing I did was I went and hugged a tree, but I didn't get a lot out of that. Sure. And I didn't really expect to, so maybe that's why I didn't.
Right.
But from that day on, anything out of the unusual I would pursue. And it seems like once that door was open, stuff started coming.
Yes.
Yeah. One of my right after that, one of my best friends told me that he'd been to a psychic in town. And this woman had been a psychic for a long time. The people that did know about mediums and stuff like that all knew of her. She had quite a following. But he said he went to her and she told him stuff that there's no way anyone could know. And I'm like, well, I'm thinking like maybe cold readings and stuff. I didn't really know all that stuff, but sure, you can guess a lot about people by looking at how they're dressed. But I figured, hey, I'll try it once. Well, by that time I was married, and my wife, for some strange reason, always wanted to go to this park south of Rochester called Letchworth State Park. It's known as the Grand Canyon of the East. There's a huge gorge there.
Oh, okay.
It's about 40 minutes south of town. And in our Monroe County, there's lots of really cool parks here. So my complaint was, why do we have to drive so far when there's a park right down the road, you know? But she always wanted to go there. So this particular day, we were supposed to go to Letchworth, but we got up late. We got into bed late and got up late. And I told her, I said, you know, by the time we drive all the way down to Letchworth, we're only going to hit like an hour, two at tops, and we're going to have to turn around and drive back because I have this appointment to see this psychic. And she said, all right, we'll do it another time. So I went to the psychic, and just as my friend had described, she actually did look to me at that time like a witch. You know, she had kind of like a hunch, and her hair was like long and stringy, and she was hunched over, and her thing was she had a crystal ball in the middle of the table. I don't know if she used it or not, but I sat across from her, and she asked to have something of mine that was metal, like keys, something that other people, only I had handled. So I gave her my watch. Back then, people wore watches, you know, and I had a nice diver's watch. So I took my watch off and handed it to her. And she held it, and she didn't wait 10 or 15 seconds, and she made a face and she said, "What's all this stuff about Letchworth State Park?" And I was like, "What?" Now, nobody other than my wife knew we were planning to go there. My buddy didn't, so there's no way anybody I knew could have passed that information to her. But that's the thing you always ask yourself, you know, like, you know, if this stuff isn't real, how did she do that, you know?
Right.
But she went on to tell me all kinds of things. Well, she's one of the first things she said after she asked about Letchworth. I told her, I said, well, my wife and I were supposed to go there today, and we had to postpone it so that I could come here because we got a late start. And she said, oh, she said, do you ever wonder why your wife always wants to go down there? I said, yeah. And she, according to her, she said my wife had a past life there as a Native American, and she still had a partial affinity for the area. I don't know if that's true or not, but so there was another thing that just shocked me. You know, how can these people do that, and without even batting an eye? And she went on to tell me a lot of other things that were also very true. But I won't go into them here. But
sure.
Between the dowsing and my first exposure to a medium, well, she was at least a psychic.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not sure if she was a medium. I don't recall her ever bringing through any of my deceased people.
Sure. But
then, so that was like a big fork in the road.
Yeah. Well, let me just say this though. I think that's incredible. I love stories and encounters and experiences like that because as I was talking to you a little bit beforehand, before we started recording, but a lot of people have a real Hollywood idea of the paranormal. Like it's got to be like Poltergeist, the movie, things going crazy. And that's what makes you believe in stuff. But no, it's sometimes a bolt bouncing in and ending up somewhere impossible, and using dowsing and stuff like that. It's the little things that I think have the most profound impacts on us, and yeah, I love those stories. So thank you for sharing those. Yeah.
So then naturally, since I had a science background, big fan of the scientific method and stuff like that. And I had this newfound, basically it's an oracle. Dowsing is an oracle.
Sure.
It'll answer any question you can think of, but you need to take care to word it because it's very, very literal. But I thought, gee, if I could cultivate this, I could use it at work. Mm. And so I did some experiments over the years, and I fixed amplifiers, I couldn't fix it by conventional means, and the pressure was on. It's almost like these scenarios you find yourself are managed by somebody. You know, I could have just fixed it by normal means, but no, not this thing. And it had to be something that they had to have fixed now because it was holding up production. So the pressure was on, and the way things just occur to you, you know, like, where did that come from? But it was like, why don't you douse it? So I go, okay. So this was my first introduction to map dowsing. So this was an very old Duquesne amplifier, and probably from the 1930s or 40s. And luckily, it had a schematic of the circuit right inside the chassis. So I used the pendulum again, and I asked what direction the faulty part. First, I asked if there was a faulty part, and I got yes. Then I said, is there more than one faulty part? And I got no. So I doused, where is the faulty part from this corner of the schematic? And it settled into a direction. So I marked it with a pencil, and I did it from two other corners, and they all came together within an area about the size of a quarter. And there were probably three components within that diameter, a little capacitor, a little resistor, and a little transistor, say. So I just used the pencil, and I just touched each component, and I doused, is this the faulty component? And I got no, and yes.
Wow.
I go, okay. So it said that the little signal transistor was bad. So I took that out, and I had a tester there for transistors, and I plugged it in to the tester, and the tester said it was okay. And I said, well, I don't care. I threw it out, and I hit another transistor, and I put it in there, and that was it. It worked fine. Wow. So, yeah, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, this is, where's this coming from?
Right.
You know, and I had another map dowsing. This was really a trophy. One of my dowsing friends, who's a famous dowser today down in Georgia, he emailed me a request, and he said, I have this friend over in Germany. He's a director of a university over there, and he's got a boiler in his basement, and the boiler's leaking, but they don't know where, because the pipes come out of the boiler and they go down into the concrete floor and then distribute to the rest of the house. And I thought, okay. He says, can you douse this? Can you douse it for him? And I asked yes or no, can I douse this for the guy? And the dowsing said yes. So I told him, I said, just have him draw a map on a piece of paper, and all it has to be is the outside perimeter of the basement and any partitions inside. And I don't even need to know where the boiler is. Okay. He knows where the boiler is.
Sure.
So, and he said, well, how detailed does the map have to be? I said, it just has to be good enough that if I put an X on it, he can find that spot. You know, if he makes a lousy map and I put a mark on it, he's not going to know how to find that location.
Right.
So he wrote back to the guy. It had to go snail mail. And so about 2 weeks later, I got a copy of the guy's map that he drew. And I printed it out. And it was very strange, because as soon as I picked the map up, the first glance, my eyes went right to one spot. Oh. Right near the center of the map, but right in a doorway where a partition line was broken. There was some sort of doorway there. And so I thought, I got to wait. I got to do this with a pendulum. So I went through my normal method of using the pendulum and drawing the pencil lines and noting where they cross. And don't they all cross right there at that spot in the doorway? Well, now I thought I had led myself. I thought, oh,
sure.
I wish I hadn't. I don't know why my eyes went there, but I didn't really have any time to fool with this thing, because I was so busy and I was at work.
Right.
So I just marked it up like that. I just put an X right there in the doorway, and I scanned it, and I emailed it back to my friend. And I just forgot about it, like, you know, he did me favors before and I just did him one. Well, don't I get another email from him about 2 weeks later with a letter from this guy on the university letterhead. And after some personal conversation between them, the guy said, I had a mason come in and chisel the concrete floor open where your friend from New York indicated, and the leak was there.
Oh my
Exclamation
gosh.
mark. Yeah, that's what I thought. If I
Wow.
had known anybody was going to go to that extreme, I never would have had the nerve to put a mark on the map. It
Right.
was just kind of like a dowsing exercise. Where's the leak? It's right there.
Sure.
But yeah, and he was. I looked him up later. He was kind of a famous economist
Wow.
um, over there. But that's a trophy. That's one of the few, you know, feedback forms I have from dowsing I've done for lots of people
Sure.
that I can actually point to something. You don't often get feedback
Right.
from others. But I have had a lot of experience. I don't know if you want to hear this other one that's pretty good.
Whatever you want to share. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, when I was an apprentice, I had only a couple journeymen uh, electricians that I worked with that I allowed to know about my paranormal skills, my
Sure.
interest in dowsing and stuff like that. But there was one guy, and after seeing some of the stuff I was doing, and I told him about the amplifier, and I showed him the letter from the guy in Germany. He came to me one day and he says, "Hey, Jim, I wonder if you could do some dowsing for me." And I thought, "Sure." He says, "I grew up down in the hills of Pennsylvania," and he said my dad ran out on the family and
Mm.
left my mom with, I can't recall if it was 3 or 4 little kids.
Oh.
And he said, we were so poor, I spent the entire summer in a swimsuit and bare feet.
Mm.
And it got to the point where my mom realized she couldn't take care of my little sister. So when she was 2, my mom adopted her out. And he said when she was about 8 years old, the family that adopted her sent my mom a picture, and he had the picture with him. And it was a little 8-year-old girl, roughly, in a little Annie Oakley cowboy outfit with the guns and the hat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that family was, reasonably well to do. They had enough means to buy her stuff like that. So he goes, I haven't seen her since she was 2, or since this picture. He
Yeah.
says, can you douse if she's still alive? And if so, where is she today? And so right off the bat, I just doused. I had the picture right in my hand. Is a woman that was this little girl. She's still alive today. And I got yes. And I said, does she live here in the United States? And it said yes. And so I broke it down from there. I said, is she living today east of the Mississippi? And it said no. I said, is she living in the United States west of the Mississippi? It said yes. And so then I had a Rand McNally Road Atlas in my drawer at work. I took it out. And, the whole United States was on 2 pages.
Mm-hmm.
But I got the pendulum out and I did my usual method. And I got right near Las Vegas. So I told him that. And he goes, geez, I'd like to find out exactly where she is. Maybe I could locate her, and see her, because his brother was not in good health.
Oh.
And he was thinking maybe they could get together with their little sister.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I tell you what, let me send this down to my buddy in Georgia, and I'll ask him to douse it, because he was a real good dowser too. And so I just emailed my friend the photograph, and with the barest information. is the woman that was this little girl, is she still alive? If so, where is she living now? And within a day or so, I got the email back from him, and he said, I'm picking her up a little bit northeast of Las Vegas.
Ding.
Okay, and then I told him the story, and then, okay, that's cool. So I told my friend that, and he goes, wow, I wish I knew closer than that. I mean, north of Las Vegas is Fargo, North Dakota, I mean, how far? So I didn't have a better map, but I said, the guy who was the president of the American Society of Dowsers at that time was a gentleman named Leroy Bull. Mm-hmm. And like most dowsers, they specialize in various types of dowsing. Some look for treasure, some look for water, some for missing persons. Well, Leroy was the latter. He specialized in locating missing persons, and I knew that. And so I told my friend, I said, why don't you contact Leroy and see if he'll douse for you exactly where she is. He said, okay. So he reached out to Leroy, and Leroy said, yeah, I'd be happy to do it for you, but I'm kind of swamped right now. It might take me a month or so. And my friend said, that's fine. Well, I came into work about a month later, and there was a big manila envelope on my bench. And I opened it up and pulled out the Rand McNally Road Atlas to the state of Nevada. Oh. And there was a sticky note sticking out of the pages, and I opened it up, and if my memory serves me correct, it was page 42. But on that page, there was an area highlighted, a little rectangle. And when I looked it up on the other map, it was about, I don't know, less than 100 miles northeast of Las Vegas. So it was right where Joey indicated, and I got close, but I had a much crummier map. But the map dowsing amazed me. How can it's just information, right, and your intention, right, to garner information from it. Well, and I found lots of lost items that I never ever would have found before. Right. So I've been dowsing ever since. I douse all kinds of stuff, just kind of as a test, trying to pick up a pattern of what makes it work better. Right.
Well, that brings up an interesting question, because you said you had said that some people specialize in different things, finding treasure, finding water. And is it just that people seem to have a talent for one aspect of dowsing, or is it just that's what they've worked the most on, so that just tends to come out the most for them? You know what I mean? What I'm asking, does that make sense?
Yeah, I do. I think if you can douse anything. Okay. But it's what their focus is, right, where your mind goes, energy flows, or something. And like, I think most of the people that douse for water are in that business. Okay. They make a living from it. Okay. And likewise with treasure. Sure. But you have to, it's like any talent, you have to study it to know all the ins and outs of it. Sure. To do it reliably, especially if you're going to charge people for it. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now there are things, a lot of things that affect it. The condition of the body. The most important thing is wording. It's extremely, extremely literal. Okay. Like one of the first times I used it to find something, I lost a little brass nozzle that goes on the end of your garden hose. Okay. You twist it and it's shut, and then you open it up and it gives you various spray patterns. Yep. It was a spring, and I found the hose, but I couldn't locate the hose nozzle. So I thought, no problem. I got the rods out this time, because I was going to ask it to take me to wherever they were. Mm-hmm. So I stood there and I said, show me where the brass nozzle is, for the hose. And then, boy, the rods, I couldn't believe how quickly the rods reacted. They swung right around. And as I turned towards them, they straightened out, and they took me down the hallway. When I got to the the door for the stairs that went down in the basement. I could tell ahead of time it wanted me to go there because as I got closer, they were turning there. I opened the door, went down the basement stairs, and as I got to the bottom of the stairs, they were turning to the left. So I followed them around, and they led me right across the basement to a workbench. And I thought, there's something screwy here. I don't think I ever brought the hose nozzle down here in the basement,
Sure.
But I followed them out, and it took me over to the right side of the bench, and there were 3 drawers. So I asked, is it in one of the drawers? It wasn't on top of the bench, and I got a yes. The rods would cross for a yes, or they would both go to the left for a no at that time.
Okay.
So I said, is it in the top drawer? I got a no. And I said, is it in the middle drawer? And I got a yes. And then just to check, I said, is it in the bottom drawer? And it got no. So I go, okay. So I pulled the middle drawer open, and it wasn't in there. And then I pulled the top drawer open, and it wasn't in there. And I pulled the bottom drawer open, and it wasn't in there either. So I pulled the middle drawer open again. And what was in there was a Burns-O-Matic propane torch kit. And I opened it up, and there was 3 brass nozzles. I just kind of laughed. I go, it was almost like the joke was on me. So I said, no. And then I pictured in my mind what the nozzle looked like. And I said, no, I want the brass nozzle that goes on the end of the garden hose. And I pictured it in my mind, and the rods swung right around. They took me back up the stairs, out through the back door of the house, and out to the barn, which was about 100 feet behind the house.
Uh-huh.
And this barn was built around 1830. And it was in disrepair. The roof was starting to go. The barn door had blown off probably decades before. And at one time, it had been full of bales of hay, which at that time, they were slowly disintegrating down into the ground. They were like rotting into the ground. So there's only like a partial bale sticking out of the very black composted hay, And then on top of the wooden floor of the main bay, there was like a inch or 2 thick. It was kind of a dust of old hay, hay that had been walked on.
Sure.
It was almost like a powder.
Yeah.
And so I got right to one spot, and the rods slowly closed, and I slowed down, and then they indicated X is the spot. And I'm looking around, and there's nothing there. And so there was a railing there, and there was nothing on the railing. And I go, well, maybe we should try this again. But for some reason, I just took my boot, and I just started kicking at the dirt right in front of my foot. Clunk. You're not gonna believe. I stuck my finger down in there, and there was that.
The nozzle.
There was that nozzle.
Does that make sense to you that it would be there? Or, I mean, did it, I must have left it here when I was this, or did it just appear there?
Well, that comes up later in my explorations about what's really there.
Right.
Later when I got to into the tarot, I always develop my own scheme for things because there's lots of rules on how stuff works that people they do it that way because somebody told them to, but a lot of them are very time consuming and unnecessary.
Right.
So with the tarot, I got to the point where I would just formulate a question in my mind while I was shuffling the cards, and I would put it down, and the intention was, I'm only going to cut the deck once. That's the answer. And I would just pick the card up. That's it.
Oh.
I'm not doing all this stuff, doing different layouts, and it's just too. I got a short attention span, I just want the answer.
Sure, yeah.
So it was like just a year or two ago, I had a question in my mind about a relationship I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I shuffled the cards, and I said, just tell me what I most need to know about relationships. Shuffle it. It's a Rider-Waite deck. I put it down. I cut the deck, and it was Judgment, the Judgment card reversed. I go, Judgment. So I got my books out because I can't remember all the meanings, and I read through all this stuff. And I go, that doesn't make any sense. So I said, let me try it over. So maybe I wasn't concentrating. Maybe I wasn't clear. I said, tell me what I most need to know about relationships. And I shuffled the cards some more, put it down there, cut the deck. Judgment reversed.
Really?
And I thought, I got the book out again. I go, boy, they really want me to get this message. And I read the whole thing, and I just couldn't put two and two together. I thought, I'm not asking about that. So I said, let me try it again. So I took it and I shuffled it up better. And I even turned around, like that kind of shuffle and everything. Shuffled it up, put it down. I said, okay, what do I most need to know about relationships? Judgment reversed.
Wow.
And so I put it down and I looked up and I read through it and all of a sudden it dawned on me. I was judging. I had a lot of assumptions, a lot of judgments, basically. And you can't do relationships mentally. You can't think your way through them. You got to get your feet wet. You got to try stuff. You got to trust people, all that stuff. So I said, okay. So my daughter comes over, and I was so excited. I go, you're not going to believe this tarot reading I did. So I demonstrated it for her. I said, I got judgment reversed 3 times. I said, I shuffled it up like this, and I put it down, and I cut the card like that. And she goes, Dad, and she points at it. It was judgment reversed again. And I put it down, and darn if that exact same thing didn't happen when my son came home. I demonstrated how it worked. So that's 5 times in a row. I don't know what the odds are.
That's pretty astronomical, yeah.
But that brings up a point what we were just talking about. Is there any point in shuffling the cards? It's like Spirit is going to force the card on you that you need to get. The shuffling is kind of handy because it fools you into thinking, okay, I randomized it. This is real. No, you're going to get whatever they want you to get.
Yeah. That's
I don't know what the card was before I actually lifted it up.
Sure.
Everything is consciousness. And I'll tell you another one that kind of goes along that line. I did some Paralandra gardening. There was this woman named Michelle Small Wright. She had written a book called Behaving as If the Light When All Things Mattered, or something like that. And then she went on to write a whole book on gardening with nature spirits. And so I went to now that I had this dowsing tool, I dowsed if it would be beneficial for me to build a Paralandra garden. And I had been into stuff like Rudolf Steiner's biodynamic gardening, working with earth energies. And this was all about working with nature spirits and crystals.
Oh, wow.
So I dowsed everything about this garden. It even had a name. And I made a round garden. Everything was dowsed. It was 30 feet in diameter. The rows were 18 inches apart. The garden was divided in quadrants according to the cardinal points. And at each cardinal point, north, east, south, and west, I buried a crystal that I dowsed. And then in the center, I buried a big chunk of rose quartz because that's what it said to do.
Oh.
Then I got a catalog from the local seed company, and I dowsed everything every item in that catalog that it wanted me to plant. I did vegetables, I did flowers, I did herbs, and I planted them all by the moon. It said to plant them above ground things at the light of the moon and underground things at the dark of the moon. And even the soil amendments, rock dust, and this stuff I'd never heard of before, but I did everything that it said to do.
Wow.
And then we had a fabulous garden that year. And at the end of the season, you were supposed to close the garden. You would go out and clean it up and discard things and then say a prayer. And then in the spring, you would do a similar thing to open the garden. Well, that winter, we had another child in the house. So we had a baby in the house and two other toddlers running around. So normally in this area, I would start getting some stuff in the garden in March, late March, like peas, and plant them in frozen mud here. And I didn't get out there. And then April came and went. And I go, gosh, I got to get out there and get the garden plowed up and, get the amendments in. And May came and went. And I kind of got into June. It's getting late, too late to plant some stuff. The warm weather's there, lettuce. So I was in the kitchen with my wife, and I had a big 12-foot wide picture window that looked out on the garden. And it was a mess out there. It was all stuff from last season and everything. And all of a sudden I looked up, and right in the middle of the kitchen, about eye level and about 6 feet straight out in front of me, looked like a 4th of July sparkler just hanging in the air. There's no stick on it, but
sure.
the sparkle itself, right in, and it was just as clear as anything. And my wife was standing there, and I said, "What's that?" And she's like looking around like this. I could tell she didn't see anything. And I pointed right at it. I said, "Right there, 3 feet right off the tip of my finger." And she's still looking around. She didn't see anything. And then after about 15, 20 seconds of that, it started moving towards the window, and it was so solid, it was almost like it was zooming out. It's not like it was bobbing around or anything. It was like that. And when it got to the glass, beep, it was gone. Uh-huh. And I went over, stood where it had been, and I looked at the direction it was going, and it was right to the center of the garden.
Oh, wow.
So I think this was the nature spirits calling me back. Come on, we gotta go again.
Oh.
But it's interesting. My wife was standing right there, and she couldn't see it, but it was just as clear as a bell to me.
Isn't that something?
So somehow your energies are managed.
Sure.
And that's why some people say they saw the UFO or the ghost, and the other people are like, I haven't seen anything.
Right. Yeah.
They weren't open to it, or they weren't meant to see it.
Yep. And I think that probably we all have unique frequencies, and, in a sense, and I don't know how to quantify that any better, but, I think that things appear to us in our frequency, in our visual frequency or our spiritual frequency. And, that it becomes a very direct message. So that was definitely for you. Absolutely.
Right.
Wow. That's so profound.
And one of the things that started happening early on and has persisted to this day is if I have a superpower, it's my ability to see energies that other people can't see. Yeah. And I only recently realized that despite being able to see all these very strange energies, my focus was always on the energies themselves. I would tell other people, what I saw, but I never really thought about my ability to see them. Mm-hmm. If I had paid more attention to my own ability, I probably could have developed it a lot better, because the most frustrating thing about it is I can't command it. It just happens sometime, and I don't know how to make it happen. There's times I'm healing people. I would love to be able to see into their bodies. I was able to do that once at the Monroe Institute. Mm-hmm. But if you can't command it, you can't do it when you need it, what good is it?
Sure. Do you meditate, Jim?
No.
Okay.
I've taken TM. I did it like once and had a cool experience. But it's one of those things that I just can't get into it, at least the way I've been taught. Right. I mean, TM was pretty easy. There was just a mantra you just kept saying over and over.
Sure.
But I've got a really short attention span. Wow. And trying to just quiet my mind, no. I just, I've never had luck doing that. I do things that are like meditation. Okay. Like some of the dowsing I do is putting myself in a different frame of mind.
Right.
I do shamanic work. I do journeys, and those are kind of like guided meditations.
Well, there you go.
Not the type where you're just sitting there nulling the mind out, clearing the mind out.
Well, I think there's one constant that seems to have come up many times in our conversation, and that is that you've developed your own path. And I think probably the same is true for your best approach to meditation, is that, and you've mentioned a few things that you do that are meditative. When your mind is focused and you're going towards some result that's very meditative for you. And so maybe the key is for you to develop your own process to meditate for meditation's sake. And I don't think, I think you're right. I think these fields are full of these prescribed rituals, and no one thing fits everybody. And so I think it is important to innovate and, try to create things that resonate with you from these many different examples that are around us. But yeah, I think, you said that you wish you would have developed this, but you're not dead yet. I still think that you can, and we can continue to, improve ourselves and project ourselves more into our experience. And so I think you'll get there if you put your mind to it. You seem like an incredibly driven person.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that's, it's a common theme with me is I'm more of a jack of all trades. It was mentioned in one of the coolest things I purchased recently. I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Stephen Forrest, but he was on Coast. No, I don't think he was on Coast, but he started this type of astrology called evolutionary astrology, and basically he goes deep into your horoscope and talks about things I never even heard of before, like the north and south nodes of the moon. But it's all about telling you what you're doing here. It tells you like the sun signs plus all the planets and all the nodes of the moon and everything and all the aspects and stuff. But the final wrap up is once he describes everything about you and why you have the challenges that you have. But the south node of the moon is all the stuff that you brought with you from other lifetimes. It's all the tools you have, all the obstacles you have and stuff like that. But the north node of the moon is what you're doing here. It's what you're supposed to do. And in there, he even mentioned that a lot of the times I don't get really, really good at something is because I'm always going around drilling 100-foot deep holes. But if I would just stop and drill a 200-foot hole, I would hit what I want. Yeah. But the choice for me is, do I want to do that? First of all, how would I know what I really have a talent for in order to waste a lot of time focusing, perhaps for years, doing one thing, when in that same period of time, I can have all these other experiences? Yeah. So I'll take what I got. I would rather it be a mile wide and an inch deep than 600 feet deep, but only one hole. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can appreciate what you're saying for sure. I tend to have the same talent base. Like I'm very scattered in my life, because my interests are so varied, and there's so many things that interest me. So I completely resonate with what you're saying, because I don't want to just look at one thing. I want to look at the whole picture and try to learn what I can from it. So it's absolutely fascinating. Now, go ahead, sir.
Oh, I was just going to add in there, like one of the advantages of the shotgun effect, doing all these things, is I always pick up patterns. When I can see the same thing here and the same thing there and the same thing there and the same thing there, I can put that together. Whereas if I only had one hole, right, and what if the hole's in the wrong spot? Yeah. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that, I think the interesting thing for me with what you were talking about with the dowsing is I've always wondered about that. I've never really done anything like that myself. But the way you're describing it, it really does seem like you are communicating with an outside presence through this medium. And I've always wondered, is dowsing like connecting to a higher version of yourself and getting through the world filters and just, making this connection to have some end result? Or is it a communal thing? So is that your assessment, that you are communicating with an outside intelligence from yourself?
Yeah, who or what it is, like you say, I don't know. It could just be my higher self.
Okay.
But in the Journal of the American Society of Dowsers, they had a guy that did quite a few experiments on it,
Mm-hmm.
and they found out that what makes the rods move and what the pendulum and all that stuff is micro fine movements of the muscles in your hands.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so your hands are actually making the rods go.
Mm-hmm.
And even with the Y rods, a lot of people don't realize that. They think just pictures of guys with a Y rod,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going looking for water, and the rod will start going down, and they try to squeeze the rod to stop it from going down so much it'll take the skin off their hands.
Oh.
But they're doing that to themselves. They're
Sure.
torquing the rod, and then they don't notice it, but their hands are making the rod go down,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to stop it. It's their own energy causing the rod to go down. It's not like there's some force pulling it down. At least that's my opinion.
Sure.
But I lost my train of thought there. But
So would you say that
and the other I know what it was. The other thing they discovered was that if they put pieces of tinfoil over your temples, it canceled out the dowsing response, as though it's coming from somewhere, or it's connecting to something. I don't know whether it's going out or coming in. But it's bizarre.
That's really interesting because I of course the temples are a very vulnerable area on our body, but isn't that something to consider, that it may be our connection to super consciousness or the divine consciousness of the world, or or our psychic awarenesses and all that thing. So it'd be interesting to hear, just as a side thought, like, okay, so if a person is a channeler of spirits, can they still channel if they'd have metal on there too? That would be really interesting to find out. I'd never heard of that.
I had a cool experience doing dowsing. Now, I had read that you cannot douse during a thunderstorm.
Oh, okay.
If there's one overhead. And I had an opportunity where I was dowsing at work, and it's a factory, and I was in an interior room, so there were no windows to the outdoors.
Okay.
And I was dowsing, and had a really nice, robust movement of the pendulum. And all of a sudden, for no apparent reason, the pendulum just stopped. Like,
boom.
I'm like, I'd never seen that before. Like, what is? I tried to get it going again, and it just stopped, dead still. And then I heard a clap of thunder. I didn't realize it, but there was a storm going overhead. So that kind of verified right there.
Right.
That has electrical disturbances interfere with it.
So when you were at work doing this, did other people realize that this was part of your process, or was it very private for you?
I didn't let other people see me do this, but I did have one interesting one where there were other people around,
Mm-hmm.
and we were working on the fire sprinkler system, and it was a special system for the computer rooms.
Oh.
And in order to make sure the pipes were always empty unless there was really a fire, there was a setup where these little tiny 1/8 of an inch diameter copper tubes went through conduits all over to the ceilings. And what it would do is the air pressure in those little tubes would rise if there was a rise in temperature.
Oh.
And that would open a valve and flood the pipes. And then you had to have an even higher temperature melt the sprinkler head. So is it protecting all the computer equipment up there?
Mm-hmm.
But there was a leak in this little tubes, and there was 5 of them. They went into a little manifold, and from there they went through a mercury check valve, so you could see the air blowing through the mercury. You knew there was a leak somewhere.
Uh-huh.
I had these other guys working with me, and they were having so much trouble taking these little tiny copper tubes out of the manifold and then putting them back in. I decided I could speed things up a lot by dowsing where the problem was, because I want to wait for them to go through 5 of these. So
Sure.
when they weren't paying any attention, I just grabbed each one at a time. Is it this one? No. Is it this one? Yes. Is it this one? No. Is it this one? No. Is it this one? Yes. So when they came back, I said, I tell you what, I got a hunch it's number 2 and number 5. Let's just do those first. And then if it's not, we'll go on. So, all right. So the guy took number 2 off, and we put a plug in there, and it was still leaking. And the guy looked at me like, I thought you said it was number 2. I said, it's 2 and 5. If either one of them is leaking, it's going to leak. So I take 5 off. So he took number 5 off and plugged that one, and the leak stopped.
Wow.
So he goes, hey, you got it. And I said, no. I said, you got to put number 2 back on to make sure it wasn't just 5. Mm-hmm. So he put number 2 back on, and it started leaking again. And there was one guy there who was he had always had a little stub of a cigar sticking out of the corner of his mouth. And he was looking at me like, how the heck did you know that? And I go, oh, it's just a lucky guess, But that was the only time I actually, when I was around other people, I've since gotten to the point where I can douse without any instruments.
Oh, nice.
I use my stomach, or my fingers, kinesiology.
Yeah.
It's not obvious to others.
Muscle testing. Yeah, that's very powerful stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I learned about that back in the day quite a bit. And it can be very, very powerful stuff for sure.
It is.
Jim, we're at about an hour here. I know we got a lot more ground to cover, so I hope we can, come up with more dates for you to come back and share more of your insights. This has been absolutely fascinating. I'm really blown away, but it's such a powerful series of events in your life that have been so transformative. So I hope you'll come back.
Absolutely. I don't think I got through a 10th of the stuff I had written down. 40 years of stuff is a lot of stuff.
Well,
but boy, that time really flew by. I'd love to come back sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back, and as many times as we need to cover what you want to cover is fine. But thank you so much for making this happen today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, sir.
I was honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.